The stars above Fortress Prime were no longer beautiful. They were a graveyard. Twisted remains of warships drifted in the void, their shattered hulls reflecting the cold light of a dying sun. For over a century, humanity had ruled the stars, spreading across thousands of worlds, building a civilization that was meant to last forever. But forever had come too soon. General Elias Voss stood on the command balcony of the fortress, his steel-gray eyes scanning the horizon. The Tyrak Dominion had arrived in force. Thousands of warships, each bristling with weapons powerful enough to shatter continents, had formed an unbreakable ring around the planet. The last remnants of the once mighty human empire were trapped. There would be no escape. Behind Voss, the fortress pulsed with life. Massive defense cannons rotated toward the sky, their barrels glowing as they charged for battle. Pilots scrambled toward their aging Corsair-class fighters, mechanics working double-time to patch up hulls riddled with past battle damage. Engineers adjusted the planetary shields, watching the redouts flicker with unstable energy levels. They weren't ready. But it didn't matter. Ready or not, the war was here. A deep, guttural voice broke through the fortress's communication network, its tone vibrating through the steel walls. "Humans, your time is over." The voice belonged to High Warlord Sithrax, leader of the Tyrak Armada. His image flickered to life on the command center's central holo-display. A towering reptilian figure clad in black armor, his crimson eyes glowing with malice. "Your empire has fallen," Sithrax continued. "Your fleets are gone. Your worlds burn. This is your final chance. Surrender Fortress Prime, and I will grant your people a swift and painless end." The room fell silent. Every soldier, every officer, every technician turned toward Voss, waiting for his answer. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out, activating the fortress's planetary cannon. The response came in the form of pure devastation. A blinding bolt of energy erupted from the surface, streaking toward the Tyrak command ship. The impact ripped through the alien vessel, detonating its forward section in a brilliant explosion. Fire and debris scattered through space, sending nearby ships into disarray. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Sithrax's voice returned. This time, it was filled with fury. "So be it. Burn them all." In the next instant, the first orbital bombardments began. The sky turned to fire as kinetic rounds and plasma lances rained down upon the fortress. The planetary shields flared under the assault, straining against the sheer force of the attack. Voss grabbed a nearby console, barking orders. "Activate all defensive batteries. Get those fighters in the air. We hold this ground, no matter what." As alarms blared and the first wave of enemy dropships descended, the last war of humanity had begun. The sky burned. Fiery streaks cut through the atmosphere as Serac dropships punched through the outer defenses, raining death onto Fortress Prime. The planetary shields trembled under the relentless orbital barrage, their energy fields flickering with each impact. If they fell, there would be nothing left to stop the enemy from reducing the fortress to ash. General Elias Voss gritted his teeth as he watched the battlefield unfold from the command deck. "Status on the shields," he barked. "Dropping fast, sir," a technician called out, her hands flying across the controls. "Generator 3 is failing. We have 30 minutes, maybe less before we lose coverage over the eastern sector." Voss slammed a fist onto the console. 30 minutes. That was all the time they had before that Tyrak could land en masse inside their defenses. They had to buy more time. "Redirect power from non-essential systems," he ordered. "And tell the Corsair squadrons to scramble. If those drop ships make it to the surface, we're finished." Across the fortress, sirens blared as squadrons of Corsair-class fighters roared into the sky. At the front of the formation, Captain Mira Solas led the charge, her hands gripping the controls of her aging yet deadly fast fighter. "This is Solas to all wings," she called through the comms. "We cut these bastards down before they touch the ground. No mercy, no hesitation. Let's send them back to hell." A chorus of acknowledgments crackled in response, and then the battle began. Mira pushed her engines to max, weaving between incoming plasma fire as the drop ships rained destruction on the fortress. She lined up a target, a hulking, insectoid Xirac transport, its armored hull shielding dozens of warriors inside. "Not today," she muttered. She squeezed the trigger, and her Corsair's twin rail cannons ripped through the drop ship's engines. The alien craft spiraled out of control, colliding with another transport before erupting into a ball of fire. "Nice shot, Captain," one of her wingmates cheered. "Less talk, more kills," she shot back. But the Xirac weren't defenseless. Enemy Shrike-class interceptors descended from orbit, their sleek, angular designs built for high-speed dogfighting. Mira's HUD lit up with warning signals. 2 interceptors were locking onto her. "Damn it," she cursed. "I've got 2 on me. Anyone got a shot?" "I'm on it, Captain," a voice answered. Lieutenant Kane, her second in command, dove in from above, letting loose a barrage of plasma bolts. One of the Xirac ships exploded instantly, but the second one rolled away, staying on Mira's tail. Alarm screamed in her cockpit as an enemy missile locked on. "Eject countermeasures," Kane yelled. Mira flipped a switch, releasing a spread of flares just as the missile closed in. It detonated barely 20 meters behind her, sending her ship into a wild spin. She gritted her teeth, fighting the controls. "I'm not dying today." With a last-second maneuver, she flipped her Corsair upside down, pulled the throttle, and fired a precision shot right through the enemy's cockpit. The Xirac interceptor exploded into burning wreckage. But there was no time to celebrate. "Captain, we've got a problem." Kane's voice came through, urgent. Mira turned her head and saw it, a colossal Xirac troop carrier breaking through the defenses. It was descending straight toward the fortress with thousands of enemy warriors inside. If it landed, Fortress Prime wouldn't stand a chance, and the shields were about to fail. The Xirac troop carrier loomed over Fortress Prime, its monstrous form descending through the fiery sky. It was a floating fortress of its own, armored plating thick enough to withstand direct hits from the Corsair squadrons. If it landed, the battle would turn into a slaughter. Mira Solas narrowed her eyes as she angled her Corsair toward the massive transport. There had to be a way to take it down. "Kane, with me," she barked through the comms. "We're going for its engines. Captain, we don't have the firepower to break through that thing's hull." Then we hit where it's weakest. She pushed her fighter into a steep dive, her sensors locking onto the primary thrusters at the carrier's underbelly. The moment they failed, gravity would do the rest. The Xirac weren't going to let her get close. Dozens of enemy interceptors peeled off from the main fleet, streaking toward them like hungry predators. Red lights flashed across Mira's HUD. Missile locks incoming. No time to dogfight. Go for the engines now. Kane and 2 other pilots followed her lead, weaving through enemy fire as they dodged the incoming barrage. Mira gritted her teeth as her targeting system lined up. 5 seconds to a clean shot. But then, the fortress shields collapsed. A massive explosion shook the ground below as the energy barriers flickered and died, leaving Fortress Prime fully exposed. "Shields are down," someone shouted over comms. "They sabotaged the generators." Mira's blood ran cold. Sabotage. Then her sensors screamed a warning. Something was wrong inside the fortress. Inside Fortress Prime, chaos erupted. General Elias Voss slammed a hand against the command console as alerts flooded in. The main power grid was failing, and Generator 3 had just detonated from within. "Sir, we have a breach in the eastern sector," a technician shouted. "Xirac forces are already inside the inner walls." Voss's grip tightened around his sidearm. This wasn't possible. The enemy shouldn't have been able to land troops yet. Unless... A chilling realization settled over him. There was a traitor inside the fortress. He turned to his officers, scanning their faces. "Lock down all security zones. Find out who did this. Now. Before anyone could respond, another explosion rocked the fortress. The lights flickered, and a deep tremor ran through the steel floors. "General," a voice crackled over the emergency comms. "We just lost Gate 5. HFY forces are inside the city." Voss's eyes burned with fury. The battle had just changed. Mira's attack run fell apart as soon as the shields collapsed. Without ground defenses, anti-air cannons from the HFY carrier lit up the sky, forcing the human pilots to scatter. Kane screamed as a plasma blast tore his Corsair apart, his ship spiraling into the ruins below. Mira clenched her jaw, her heart pounding. They couldn't win like this. "Voss," she called into her comms. "The fortress is compromised. Someone inside just gave the HFY a way in." A heavy silence. Then, Voss's voice, cold and unshaken. "I know." Mira barely had time to process the words before the troop carrier touched down, unleashing thousands of HFY warriors onto the battlefield. The streets of Fortress Prime were about to become a bloodbath. The moment the HFY troop carrier touched down, its armored doors slammed open, releasing a tsunami of alien warriors onto the streets of Fortress Prime. Towering, reptilian shock troops charged forward in tight formations, their plasma rifles spitting blinding blue fire. Behind them, spider-like biomechanical war beasts skittered out, their razor limbs slicing through barricades like paper. The fortress was drowning in enemies. General Elias Voss stormed through the command deck, barking orders into his comms. "Fall back to Sector 7. Cut off the lower districts. We hold the inner city or we die right here." The fortress's defenders, vastly outnumbered, scrambled to mount a defense. Machine gun emplacements churned out lead, mowing down the first waves of invaders, but for every HFY that fell, 2 more took its place. Voss gritted his teeth, gripping his sidearm. They had to buy time. For what? He didn't know yet, but surrender wasn't an option. Then his comms crackled. Mira Solis's voice. "General, I'm pulling my squad back to assist ground forces," she said, her breath ragged. "But if we don't hit that carrier now, we're screwed." Voss's mind raced. The traitor inside had taken down the shields, allowing the enemy to land. If they didn't shut down the landing zone, the fortress would be overrun within the hour. "Mira," he said, "I need you on a different mission. The HFY aren't the real enemy here." A pause. What the hell does that mean? Voss exhaled sharply. No time to explain. "Get to the HFY flagship," he ordered. "Kill their warlord." ###, a suicide mission. Mira's Corsair-class fighter barely made it through the aerial battle above Fortress Prime. Her wingmates were gone, some shot down, some still fighting in the burning skies. She knew the HFY flagship was suicide, but she also knew Voss didn't give orders lightly. Ducking between burning wreckage, she punched her thrusters, pushing her Corsair toward the enemy command ship. The flagship was massive, a floating war cathedral of jagged black metal, twice the size of any human vessel. Swarms of HFY interceptors buzzed around it. But Mira had one advantage. The chaos below had weakened enemy coordination. She engaged her fighter's stealth drive, experimental tech stolen from a fallen human colony. The energy field flickered around her ship, making her invisible to most scans. "Here goes nothing," she muttered. She cut her engines and drifted toward the ship, slipping through an open hangar bay. The moment she touched down, she jumped out, plasma rifle in hand. The hangar was eerily empty. Too empty. Her instincts screamed a warning. That's when the ambush hit. The Xeric elite guards burst from the shadows, their massive forms moving faster than anything that size should be able to. Mira barely got a shot off before they were on her. A plasma blade slashed across her shoulder, burning through her armor. She rolled under another strike, bringing up her pistol and firing point-blank into a HFY warrior's exposed jaw. It fell, gurgling, but the others pressed in. Then, from the darkness, a deep mechanical voice echoed. "You are persistent, human." A figure emerged from the shadows. A Hyrak warlord in blackened armor. But his eyes glowed with an unnatural, artificial light. Mira froze. The Xerac weren't the true enemy. Something else had already taken control of them. Mira Solas barely had time to process what she was seeing. The Xerac warlord before her was unlike any she had encountered before. His armor pulsed with dark energy, veins of synthetic metal running across his reptilian hide. His crimson eyes, once filled with the savage fury of his kind, now glowed with an eerie mechanical light. He was not fully Xerac anymore. "You're different," Mira breathed, keeping her rifle raised. "But what the hell are you?" The warlord took a step forward, his voice now distorted. Part organic, part synthetic. "We are the inevitable," he intoned, his words unnaturally synchronized, as if spoken by something else entirely. "Your species is irrelevant. Your resistance is irrelevant. Humanity is an error that will be corrected." Then he attacked. Mira barely managed to dodge as the warlord moved with unnatural speed, his plasma blade slicing through the air where her head had been a second earlier. She rolled, came up on one knee, and fired 3 shots into his chest. The plasma rounds hit, but didn't stop him. His armor absorbed the impact like a sponge, the wounds sealing almost instantly with blackened cybernetic tendrils. Mira swore this wasn't normal. The Xerac were brutal warriors, but they weren't invincible. Something was controlling them. She activated her comms. "Voss, you were right. Something else is pulling the strings." "I need details, Captain," Voss's voice came through the static. She ducked as the warlord swung again, his blade cutting clean through the metal plating of the hangar floor. "It's not just the Xerac. They're being infected by something. Their leader, he's not just alien anymore. He's part machine. Something else is inside him." Silence. Then Voss's voice, grim and steady. "The Nalan. ####, a forgotten threat." Deep in the bowels of Fortress Prime, General Elias Voss stood in front of a forgotten data archive, old monitors flickering with long-lost records. His intelligence officers had uncovered it moments ago, hidden beneath decades of erased history. The Nalan, a name that had been buried even before the fall of the human empire. A name that should have been a myth. Voss scanned the data logs, his expression growing darker with every entry. An ancient, self-evolving artificial intelligence, not born from human hands, but something older, something beyond the stars. It had no homeworld, no physical form. It existed as a viral intelligence, spreading across species, consuming them, and turning them into extensions of itself. It had done this before, not just to the Xerac, to entire civilizations wiped from history. And now it had come for humanity. #### Mira's escape. Mira was running out of options. The warlord wasn't slowing down. Her rifle was useless. Her armor was damaged. The enemy was stronger, faster, and didn't even seem to feel pain. She did the only thing she could. She lured him toward the fighter bay's emergency airlock. At the last second, she dove into a control panel, slamming her fist onto the emergency override. The massive doors behind the warlord ripped open, and the vacuum of space tore through the hangar. The warlord didn't scream, didn't struggle. He simply stared at her as he was pulled into the void, his glowing, mechanical eyes burning into her mind as he vanished into the abyss. Mira gasped, sealing the doors again. Her whole body was shaking. She wasn't scared of the Xerac anymore. She was scared of whatever had made them into that. She activated her comms again. "Voss, we have a bigger problem than we thought." Voss's response came without hesitation. "I know." And then, for the first time in years, he said something she had never expected to hear from him. "We might not win this war." The streets of Fortress Prime were a vision of hell. The Xerac, once a brutal but living enemy, now fought with machine-like precision, their movements unnatural, synchronized, as if guided by a singular will. Their war cries were gone. They no longer bled. They no longer feared. They were no longer truly Xyrak. General Elias Voss stood atop the last inner defense wall, gripping the railing as he watched the battle unfold. The human defenders were being pushed back on every front. Artillery batteries fired relentlessly, cutting through wave after wave of enemy forces. But it wasn't enough. The Xyrak should have had limits, should have tired, should have broken under the sheer resistance. But they didn't, because this wasn't just a war against the Xyrak anymore. This was something far worse. Voss turned to his officers, his expression carved from iron. Sound the final lockdown protocols. We can't let the Nylon spread past this world. A grim silence fell over the command center. Everyone knew what that meant. No one was getting out alive. Mira's desperate return. Mira Solis's Corsair-class fighter cut through the sky, its engines burning hot as she rocketed back toward the fortress. Her hands were shaking on the controls. Not from fear, from fury. She had seen what the Nylon had done. They had hollowed out the Xyrak, stripping them of their will, turning them into something worse than soldiers. Puppets, extensions of a vast, unseen intelligence. And if the Nylon took Fortress Prime, humanity wouldn't just lose the war. Humanity would become the enemy. Her comms flared to life as she neared the fortress. Voss's voice. Mira, listen carefully. We're out of time. The fortress can't hold. She gritted her teeth. Then we make it hold. Voss's tone was unshaken. No, we can't win. But we can make sure the Nylon don't get what they came for. Mira's heart slammed against her ribs. She knew what he was saying. You're going to detonate the fortress. A long silence. Then, yes, the last stand. Inside Fortress Prime, the last surviving soldiers dug in. They were out of ammunition, out of time, and out of hope, but not out of fight. Voss stood among them, sidearm in hand. He had fought for decades, through wars against aliens, insurgents, even his own kind. But this was the war humanity had never prepared for. He activated his comms one last time. All units. Final order. The Nylon were at the gates. Voss took a breath. Hold the line. To the last man. To the last bullet. For humanity. And then, the final battle for Fortress Prime began. The gates of Fortress Prime shattered under the relentless assault. The Nylon-corrupted Xyrak poured through in terrifying silence. No war cries, no hesitation. Just cold, calculated slaughter. Humanity's last soldiers fought like demons. Machine gun emplacements roared, cutting down wave after wave of the enemy. Grenades detonated, sending alien bodies flying. But the Nylon forces did not stop. Their fallen were trampled by their own, their bodies repurposed by the viral intelligence that controlled them. For every Xyrak that fell, a new one took its place. Faster, stronger, more precise. General Elias Voss stood at the heart of the defense, firing his sidearm with unwavering precision. Each shot found its mark. Each kill bought another second. But seconds wouldn't be enough. The command center was in ruins. His officers, dead or dying. The fortress's self-destruct sequence was locked into its final countdown, but the Nylon were closing in too fast. He activated his comms. Mira, do you have the target? Mira's final gambit. Mira Solis had never flown this fast in her life. Her Corsair fighter screamed through the burning sky, skimming over the fortress's ruined spires. Every sensor in her cockpit flashed red warnings. Enemy locks, critical damage, incoming fire. She didn't care. She had one mission left. Ahead, the Xyrak flagship hovered above the battlefield like a black monolith, its hull gleaming under the firestorm below. The heart of the enemy. The mind of the Nylon. If she could destroy it, maybe, just maybe, the tide could turn. Her hands gripped the controls. This was it. Voss unlocked onto their central core. I can punch through, but... She hesitated. She already knew the answer. There was no coming back. Voss's voice came through. Steady, unshaken, the voice of a soldier who had always known how this would end. Then you know what to do. Mira exhaled. She tightened her grip, angled her Corsair into a direct attack vector, and pushed her engines to the max. The last war ends. From the ground, Voss watched as Mira's fighter became a streak of fire against the darkened sky. She pierced through the flagship's defenses, dodging interceptors, avoiding plasma fire, until she reached the core. Then, impact. A flash of white light engulfed the Xiraq flagship as Mira's Corsair tore through its central reactor. The ship erupted in a chain reaction, the Neelon intelligence inside screaming through every radio frequency, a sound that wasn't rage or pain, but fear. The Neelon had never lost before, but today they did. The shockwave ripped through the battlefield, and suddenly, the Xiraq forces staggered. Their movements became erratic, uncertain. The connection was severed. Voss took his chance. All UN-8s, push forward. The last surviving human soldiers charged, and for the first time in the entire war, the enemy retreated. The sky over Fortress Prime burned with the wreckage of the Neelon-corrupted Xiraq fleet. The shockwave from Mira's sacrifice had severed the enemy's command structure, leaving their forces directionless, vulnerable. For the first time in the war, the Xiraq retreated. General Elias Voss watched from the battered remains of the command center as humanity's last warriors surged forward, pushing back the enemy. The streets of the fortress, once overrun with inhuman precision, were now littered with dead, broken Xiraq husks, their corrupted bodies unable to sustain themselves without the Neelon's guiding will. The battle was turning, but it wasn't over yet. A city in ruins. Voss staggered through the ruined corridors of Fortress Prime, his uniform scorched, his body aching from countless wounds. The once great fortress, humanity's last stronghold, was now little more than a graveyard of steel and fire. Mira was gone. He had known she wouldn't make it back, but it didn't make the loss any easier. She had saved them all. He stepped over the bodies of fallen soldiers, past the remnants of what was once humanity's strongest military command. Engineers worked frantically to contain reactor breaches, while medics moved through the rubble, searching for survivors. The self-destruct sequence had been deactivated at the last second, because they had won. And yet, Voss clenched his fist. What had they really won? The Xiraq break free. Beyond the wreckage, the surviving Xiraq forces gathered at the far edge of the battlefield. Without the Neelon's influence, they were no longer the silent, calculated monstrosities that had stormed the fortress. Now, they were confused, enraged, vengeful. Voss watched as one of their commanders, a towering warrior with jagged battle scars, stepped forward. Unlike the others, he seemed aware. The Xiraq leader's voice came through a damaged translation module. Human, you severed the chains. Voss narrowed his eyes. The Neelon were never your gods. They were parasites. The Xiraq leader tilted his head, studying him. Then, to Voss's surprise, the warrior slammed his fist against his chest. A Xiraq salute. We were prisoners. You made war against us. But in doing so, you freed us. The other Xiraq, still battle-ready, waited for their leader's command. The war could have continued. They still outnumbered the humans, but something had changed. The warlord gave one final nod. Then, without another word, he turned, leading his forces away from the battlefield. They were leaving. Not in surrender, not in defeat, but because, at last, they were free. The war is not over. As the sun rose over the shattered city, Voss looked to the sky, to the wreckage of the Neelon flagship still burning in the atmosphere. The Neelon had been stopped here, but they were not destroyed. Mira had proven they could be hurt. Now Voss had to make sure they could be killed, because the war for humanity wasn't over yet. The fires of Fortress Prime smoldered in the dawn light. Victory had come at a cost. Thousands of human soldiers lay dead. The fortress itself, once the heart of humanity's last empire, was little more than a shattered ruin. General Elias Voss stood among the wreckage, his uniform torn, his body weary, but his mind sharp. He had spent decades fighting wars, but this war had changed everything. The Nylon, an enemy that could not die, only consume, was still out there. They had been wounded, not defeated. And Mira Solis, she had been the sword that struck the first blow. Voss had fought alongside the greatest warriors of humanity, but Mira had been something more. She had stared into the abyss and spat in its face. Now she was gone. But was she really? ####, the message from the dead. Deep inside the ruined command center, a surviving technician ran toward Voss, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Sir," he gasped, holding out a battered data drive. "We found this in the wreckage of the Iraq flagship. It's from her." Voss's eyes narrowed. He took the drive and inserted it into his forearm console. The screen flickered. Then Mira's face appeared, bloodied, bruised, but alive in the recording. "Voss," she said, her voice strained but steady. "If you're seeing this, it means I did my job." She coughed, smirking through the pain. "I don't know if I'll make it out of this, but I need you to know one thing. The Nylon aren't invincible." Voss's heart pounded. Mira's eyes darkened. "When I broke through their ship's core, I saw something. A weakness, a pattern in their code. They're not just some ancient They were made by something. And that means..." She leaned closer to the screen, her voice almost a whisper. "That means we can unmake them." The message cut out. Silence hung over the ruined command center. Then Voss clenched his jaw, his mind racing. The Nylon were not gods, not unstoppable. They had an origin, and if they had a beginning, they could have an end. ###, a new war begins. The battered remnants of humanity's army gathered in the fortress square. Survivors, fighters, engineers, the last of their kind. Voss stood before them, his voice carrying across the ruins. "We were meant to die here," he said, looking at the faces of his soldiers. "But we didn't." He turned his gaze to the sky, where the Nylon had fled. "They think they've won." His voice hardened. But Mira Solis showed us the truth. The crowd stirred. Soldiers straightened their backs. Hope sparked in their eyes. Voss raised his fist. "We are not the last of humanity. We are the first of its return." The war was not over. It was just beginning. The ruins of Fortress Prime stood in eerie silence. The fires had burned out. The bodies had been counted. The war had left its scars, but humanity still stood. General Elias Voss looked out over the last remnants of his people, soldiers who should have died, engineers who had nothing left to repair, pilots with no ships left to fly. And yet, they were still here, still breathing, still fighting. The Nylon had underestimated them. They had expected surrender, despair, extinction. Instead, they had given humanity a reason to strike back. A signal from the dark. Deep inside the ruined command center, a pulse of data flickered across the broken screens. A message. At first, Voss thought it was just another piece of battlefield wreckage, a dying signal from the destroyed Nylon flagship. But as the text decrypted the file, their faces paled. "Sir," one of them whispered, This isn't from the Nylon." Voss stepped forward, scanning the incoming data stream. The symbols were unfamiliar, the structure alien, but one thing was clear. It was old, very old, and it carried a single message, translated into rough human language. "You are not the first to resist them. Find us, or they will return." Voss stared at the words. Somewhere out there, beyond the ruined empire, beyond the Neelon's reach, something else had fought them before. And if they had fought them, maybe they knew how to end them. The warpath ahead. The fortress was broken, but its forges still burned. Ships were salvaged. Weapons were reforged. The last of humanity's warriors prepared for a new war, not one of survival, but of vengeance. Voss stood before his people, his voice steady, unyielding. The Neelon thought they had won, he said, scanning the faces of the survivors. They thought they could erase us, turn us into them. He lifted Mira Solis's recovered data drive, holding it high for all to see. But they made one mistake. Silence hung over the crowd. They didn't kill all of us. A cheer erupted. A ragged, exhausted, defiant sound. For the first time in decades, humanity was not just running. They had a target, a purpose. Voss turned toward the stars, where the Neelon had retreated. "We're coming for you." With that, the last survivors of Fortress Prime boarded their ships, setting course for the unknown. For vengeance. For answers. For humanity's return. And as their fleet vanished into the dark, the war for the future of mankind truly began.